welcome to the third episode of Three-Eyed Haven, the Grand Haven Tribune's podcast looking into the Game of Thrones. And we're coming to you after last night's, or Sunday night's, explosive episode 3. So I'm Matt DeYoung. I'm here with
Alexson.
And we're going to take a look back at what we've all been waiting for, the Battle of Winterfell. And Alex, what was your thoughts on this battle?
Yeah, so it was a battle. we weren't sure exactly if they were going to pull something, over our eyes or not, but it definitely went down, and as we expected, there was a lot of death, a lot of violence, and a few surprises. And I think just to start, a lot of the talk out there has been about the cinematography of this episode, the fact that we do have this big, massive scale battle, but a lot of it is shrouded in darkness and confusion. And I'd like to defend what they went with there, because I think that, first of all, people were complaining about like their TVs not being able to keep up with the penetrating dark that they had on screen. But in these real opening shots where you're just looking at this black vista of nothing, and me sitting there on my couch, I'm like just peering really hard to try to see into that, and there really was nothing there. Like, it was a black screen, but your mind is playing tricks on you as you're trying to make something out in the darkness. I thought that was really effective. And then when there was light, it was used in really interesting ways. So I thought, especially those couple of early moments when Melisandre comes in, obviously we'll talk about her, but when she comes in and lights up the Dothraki blades, I think they have a name, don't they? They have to. All the weapons get a name, right? So those all light up, and they charge in to the battle, into the nothingness. And I mean, I think you hear some things, but there's just this shot of that dark vista with all of these lights that are those individual swords, and silence, near silence, as they just one by one are extinguished and go out like fireflies. And that was just, I thought, breathtaking.
Yeah, I will agree totally. So obviously Twitter, Facebook, social media is blowing up with everyone like, oh, you didn't watch Game of Thrones, you didn't miss anything, we couldn't see what happened. Like, there was a lot of people, I think, that were upset that it was so dark. I know we were watching with my wife, she kept on saying, this is too dark, it's freaking me out. And I think that was the point. Like, it made it scary. This show hasn't really been about the jumps and the scary, things. I mean, there's been a couple eerie parts, especially like right off the bat, where they're, the very first moments of the first episode where they're in the woods and the White Walkers are chasing them. I mean, that was scary. But for the most part, this hasn't really been a scary show. I mean, there's been enough other things in it, but frightening hasn't really been one of them. But this episode was spooky. I mean, it was so dark.
It was like a horror movie.
You couldn't tell. Yeah. You couldn't tell who was who, what was what, who was where, what was happening. But I agree with you 100%. When Melisandre comes in and she says, do you speak their language? Asks them to put up, I think they're their Arix or something like that. And she grabs on.
We'll go with that.
And she does her little chant, and they flame up. And it's like, oh my gosh.
And then you see the scale. You see just how many there are.
Yeah, I mean, right, what's the number? 10,000 Dothraki, I think we have. So, and you just see them all light up, and then they charge off, and they're screaming their battle cry. And so we saw this army come up against the Lannisters and mow them down as if the Lannisters were nothing, right? Jaime Lannister even said, I've seen them in the field. We can't stand up to them. So they go out. You don't see what they're going toward. They're riding out in the darkness. They show the view from Jon and Daenerys up on top of this mountain looking over them, and it's just this huge field of flame advancing. And you're right, as then all of a sudden they start to disappear, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's a minute and 10,000 of them are gone and done and dead. And it's just stunning and terrifying. And it's like, well, that didn't work, and what are we going to do now? Because certainly the Unsullied standing there with their spears aren't going to do any more damage. And clearly Daenerys saw that too, because here's another thing that kind of jumped out is this whole thing is about drawing out the Night King, right? Having him come out, expose himself.
Yep.
Yes. But Daenerys, once again, is a little too brash, a little too impatient. She sees her entire army decimated. Her next army, the Unsullied, about to get demolished, and she kind of springs into action.
She gets mad.
Yeah.
And she acts emotionally, and which is really true to her character.
Sure.
That she has kind of a vengeance at times. So
Yeah.
I think it was the same people that shot the Battle of the Bastards episode as well.
Okay.
Sort of the chaotic confusion and these very like quick moving shots and sporadically thrown together. I think that's effective too. It reminds me somewhat of like Saving Private Ryan, where you have just this chaotic camera work where you're kind of at eye level with these soldiers.
Sand getting kicked up into your face as you're watching, and
exactly, and this, you've got swords getting thrown all over, and just a lot of just guttural cries and screams, and you just really feel like you're in the middle of that battle. And another thing, I felt the sense of exhaustion, like when you have to fall back, when they're calling to fall back, and they're running from the field to the that barricade into the castle, running through you're like, oh my god, like I'm out of breath, and it really put you there.
Well, and something else that I thought was really effective is you never really got a good look at the battle, like the army of the Whites coming. They came in masses. They came. I mean, we talked about this. These aren't your Walking Dead zombies. These are your World War Z, fast, terrifying, like. You can't run away from them. They're coming, and they're coming at you 100 miles an hour and throwing themselves against you in numbers unimaginable. But it's not like you saw like this huge army of them. You just see glimpses of them coming and dashing. They're like waves crashing into the shore. But here's the problem. There's always another wave. No matter which one you beat back, there's always more. And yeah, you see these stars. You see Brienne. You see Jaime. You see Jorah Mormont. You see them chopping down one after another to where they can hardly lift their arms, and their faces are covered in gore. And I mean, seriously, I'm like breathing heavy as I'm watching, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So it was crazy. We did jump over the very beginning, which I think was a cool way. We left this with the White Walkers coming up to the gates of the approaching Winterfell. Everyone watching, the troops out in the field, like it's about to be on. But they didn't start that way, right? It didn't start with, boom, the attack. We had about 10 minutes of this very sobering, quiet preparation. And I thought that set the scene spectacularly. We got a quick look at everybody from Tyrion to Jaime and Brienne and pretty much everybody. We kind of, once again, just a reminder, everyone is here. And here's where they are.
It does really set up like where they're located on the battlefield.
You see Theon and the Iron Men going with Bran into the Godswood, and it's like, all right, here's the chessboard. Here's where all the pieces are. We're about to play the game. So I thought that was a cool way to
be so quiet and have so much tension. You just know what's coming.
So then we get into the battle, and we've discussed it a little bit. It was dark. It was kind of hard to see. It was visually spectacular in a lot of places, but I loved how it jumped from this huge, big battle to all these little individual skirmishes. I mean, once it got inside the walls of Winterfell, especially with Arya hiding, I don't know if that was a library or what room she was in. All I could think of in that point, honestly, was Jurassic Park, like as they're hiding from the velociraptors and throwing the book to kind of distract them. But, I mean, it was silent again. And the fact that you knew this huge battle was going on, she's in there and there's not a sound, was like, just the total contrast was awesome, and even more scary, I think, to put you in that situation as she's trying to escape this room with a dozen waits in it coming to hunt her down.
Another hats off to the camera work here too, because you have these perfect angles where she's like rolling and pivoting and jumping under things, and roughly where the Whites are located, but at every turn you think she might turn right and walk right into one, and eventually she does, but
it happens to
somehow got out of there.
Yes, thank goodness.
Yeah.
So that was incredible. I mean, we had some great scenes down in the crypt. I think the best one, and we'll get to this in a minute, of Sansa and Tyrion cowering back kind of behind one of the grave sites, talking, but
it was just painful to watch.
Yes, but in
because you wanted them to be up top fighting, because they are heroic in some ways. They're not fighters, they're not really warriors, but and they have to survive this. But you felt like you could sense their helplessness and that they wanted to be more involved somehow.
You even hear Tyrion saying, "If I'm up there, I might see something no one else does. And Sansa, not doubting him, just says, if you go up there, you're going to die. And then you hear the battle coming to the doors of the crypt, and everyone just is silent, and you can hear the screaming outside the doors, and it's amazing.
And Tyrion's a military strategist too, so
yeah,
he could have been helpful, but and we've seen him in battle before too.
Yeah,
but yeah, he's needed, I think, for the next phase of this story when we do have to deal with Cersei at some point.
Yeah. So we get a second Melisandre viewing. So she comes out, and you have to remember, Melisandre is the one that burns Shireen at the stake in order to get the god's favor, and I mean, has done some terrible things. But then she saves Jon Snow, brings him back from the dead. Now she's here, and it's hard to figure out, like, is she good? Is she bad? Is she neither? Like, she's just playing her part, and it doesn't matter, if she's helping you or hurting you, she's still doing her thing. But she gets out there and she's grabbing these wooden ramparts because the dragons can't see that they need to light the trench, and she's chanting, and these zombies are streaking at her 100 miles an hour, and she stands in and boom, lights it up. And I think at that point is when it brought some light to the battle, and you could all of a sudden see what was happening, and you've got these orange shadows on everybody, and that was visually spectacular as well. And she's kind of like, that's her last act, because Sir Davos is there, and he had sworn that he would execute her if she sees her again, and she says, save your energy, I'm not going to survive through the end of the night.
You wonder if we're supposed to become converts to the Lord of Light, because she is pretty effective and seems to know what's going on, but I feel like it's not really her making decisions. She seems guided by these convictions, and as though she has seen the path before her. She knows exactly what's coming, so she's going through those motions, and it's not really her doing it, but yeah.
So we suddenly have some light. The dragons are about to enter the battle, and you're thinking, like, okay, the only way we're going to ever win this is if Jon and Daenerys take the dragons and just torch everything, because there's absolutely no way a couple dragon glass barriers or throwing some spears and arrows are going to do any good against this army. And immediately as they take off and start to come, you see this storm coming behind them, and it comes over Winterfell, and all of a sudden it renders the dragons basically useless. And this kind of reminded me of something that happened very early in this series when Samwell Tarly's talking about what he learned about the Whites, and he says, well, they come when it's cold. And then he reconsiders and says, or maybe they bring the cold with them. And they never really say what this storm is that comes, but I think it's really implied that the Night King and the White Walkers have brought this with them, like this storm of wind and snow, and it totally, all of a sudden the dragons are engulfed in it. They can't see anything. They don't know where to go. And it's that was difficult to watch too, because you don't know which dragon's which. All of a sudden the third dragon comes in and they're kind of fighting, and you can't really tell who's who unless one of them's shooting blue flame. That gives them away a little bit, but it was just a tangled mess of dragons going at each other. And again, I think it was difficult, but I think it made you like even more clenched up as you're watching it, like trying to figure out what's going on. And it's frustrating because it's not easy. It's not a clear open sight to just go dive bomb and strafe all these billions of walkers and demolish them. It made it so that wasn't possible, and set up what ended up being a really awesome ending to this show.
This really justified putting Jon on a dragon in that first episode, because then you at least have a clarifier. Okay, this is Jon on this dragon, or Daenerys on that one, or the Night King, and so that at least helped try to keep them separate. But I thought some of those shots where they were just like way up high in the atmosphere and these clouds were just epic.
Oh yeah, when they're
so
up above,
cool.
And then they show them look around and dive back
bomb,
and do
yeah.
it. Yes.
Really awesome.
Yeah, it was. And so the one thing I wanted, in the books, the dragons are all very distinctive based on their color. In the shows, that hasn't really been played out. So that was one complication that, if that
Plus
was the
it's
case.
dark.
Plus it's dark, yes. I mean, the black dragon is probably going to look black anyways. I think the other ones are green, and I don't remember if one's red. I'd have to go back and look, but I think they do have the distinct colors. But it's really hard here to tell which one's which unless you see who's riding upon it. But then you see the two dragons kind of side by side, and they're scuffling, and you see the Night King fall off. And of course, he's not going to get hurt by the landing, right? We know that that's not going to happen. But then we have him standing on the ground, and Daenerys with Drogon hovering right above him. And it's like, this is too easy, right? You know this can't be it. They even hinted at it. Do we know if Dragonfire can kill him? No, we don't know if it can or can't. And he engulfs the Night King in flames, and you just kind of know, right? You just kind of know
the Night King's going to be okay.
He's going to be standing there.
Yeah, and I wonder too if maybe that means he is a Targaryen. If he can survive that, maybe he's impervious to flame.
You don't know.
So,
but yeah,
that might hint at that as well. But maybe we won't ever get the identity of the Night King. I kind of hope we do, but he's gone now.
We think.
So
that doesn't quite work, and it also doesn't melt his weapon that he's got at his side, which he picks up and quickly hurls at Daenerys, fortunately missing her. You see Jon Snow running up. He's got his sword. You know he can kill the Night King if he gets there in time. And then just what we don't want to see happens. He kind of sits there and puts his hands out, and just what we saw, I think, at Hardhome in the episode where he raises the dead. And pretty much everyone who's died in the entire battle.
Like everyone, just all these random people are just like, oh, back at it, including some of our heroes.
Yeah, and it's totally demoralizing for us sitting on our comfortable living room couches. Is demoralizing. You just can't imagine what John's thinking as all of a sudden he's surrounded. And so you mentioned some of our heroes. So we hadn't really talked about this yet, but we knew some people were going to die.
We've got some deaths now.
Yes.
Officially.
Yeah, so we go through it. Obviously, we've got Gendry, Brienne, Sam, Jaime, Jorah. They're all in the midst of this epic battle.
Inside the gates of Winterfell, but
barely
up and
able
downstairs
to lift their arms up. But the first one we lose, and I think maybe somewhat predictable because he's not a main character, but someone that we've gotten to know over the years is Dolorous Edd, who's the commander of the Night's Watch.
He's a good guy.
Yeah. He gets a dagger in the back of the head or something to that effect, and he dies. It's sad.
I think saving Sam Tarly.
Yes, he does save Sam in the process, which is great. The next one hit a little harder, and this certainly isn't a main character throughout the course of the season, but Lyanna Mormont, the little girl from Bear Island, head of the Mormont family. And I looked back, and they said basically like she was supposed to have one scene in one episode where she kind of stood behind Jon Snow and said, "We support Jon Snow. There's got to always be a Stark in Winterfell," type of thing. But they were so impressed by her character and what she did that they had to build her in more. And so she has become kind of a central figure here in Winterfell. And here she is, this little girl leading her to the armies, and here comes a zombie giant and bashes her with a club and then picks her up. And all I'm saying as I'm sitting there is like, she's got to have one last little heroic action in her. And sure enough, she jabs him in the eyeball with her dragonglass dagger and goes out a hero of the battle for killing this giant zombie that otherwise would have continued to wreak havoc. And that was a tough scene.
It was really hard to watch. Yeah. We do see her eyes light up when the dead are raised, but yeah, she was obviously in this past season. She was a really strong, kind of defiant leader of the North, and a great advocate for her people, despite being a young girl. But we've seen some pretty strong young girls in this show.
Yes, including one that we'll talk about in a few minutes here.
Let's wrap up the deaths here.
We lose Dolorous Edd, Lyanna Mormont.
Oh, Beric Dondarrion
dies. So that's kind of the scene where Arya does get out of the room with all the whites, and then Beric and the Hound, who, the Hound killed Beric earlier on, only to be brought back to life. Those two kind of form a bit of an unlikely friendship, and they save Arya, but in the process, Beric Dondarrion gets stabbed several times, kind of blocking off the hallway.
But he convinces the Hound to
kind of get back in the battle.
Right, to get back in the battle and save Arya, and finally we have the Hound do something.
Yes, and they actually all end up in the room with Melisandre talking to Arya. And so we will jump back into who else died. But I thought this was interesting because I didn't really remember Arya having run into Lady Melisandre. When Melisandre came in, she and Arya make eye contact, and it's like clear that they have a history. I couldn't remember. I went back, and it turns out that she was there when she took Gendry because she knew he had king's blood early on in the series. And Arya was there at that point, and they'd had some conversations. I had forgotten about that. So we do have a little bit of their reconvening, and they have a great line a little bit later on where she says something along the lines of, "What do we say to the God of the dead?" And Arya says, "Not today." And that was awesome.
Classic throwback.
Yes, it was great.
And she'll have another... she had a few, actually, in this episode. Toward the beginning, she tells Sansa to stick him with the pointy end.
Yeah,
when she hands her blade.
I stand corrected. I kind of gave them grief for letting Theon protect Bran, but Theon and his Iron Men really kick some butt in this scene. I mean, they've got these White Walkers flying around, or
they're
the Whites,
very accurate.
not the White Walkers, the Whites,
yeah.
Flying around, and they're taking them down with their flaming arrows, one after another, and they run out of arrows, and he's fighting with his sword, with a spear, and he kills every last one. But then you see the White Walkers come in, led by the Night King. And you know it's not going to end good. And I thought it was kind of a cool little moment when Bran says, "Theon, thank you. You're a good man." And that's kind of a coming full circle from Theon, who
just needed to hear that, I think.
Yeah, for sure. For someone who, turned against his quote-unquote family, the Starks, and, basically brought down the downfall of Winterfell, but then paid dearly for it by being, taken over by... Ramsay Bolton and turned into Reek and everything that we went through, which we won't go back over.
Right.
And he takes the spear, and I was hoping he'd throw it at the Night King, because at least then you can run the other way.
You got some distance, and
he goes full hero mode and charges him, kind of like Jaime charging at Daenerys with the dragon in the way, and yeah, it didn't end well. Predictably, the Night King steps aside and cuts him
down.
Puts an end to Theon, who, Theon's another one right off the bat in the very first episode. He's been a major player.
He's been
in
a
this
central
entire
character.
thing.
Yep.
So it was great to see him, and
we saw him redeemed though over the course of the series. We saw him sink to the lowest and then really suffer for it, and to see him come back. This is what he was really meant to do, was to protect the Starks. So he's died serving his purpose. So
the Night King walks up. Bran sits there. Bran finally, deigns to look up at him as he gets right there, and they have this little face-to-face, and I was waiting for someone to say something. I don't know if the Night King can talk. We haven't heard him speak, right, throughout. And I'm like, what's he going to say? Like, well, first, I'm thinking it's going to end right here, and we're going to have to wait till next week to see what happens, because to set the stage, at this point, everyone in Winterfell is about to die. The crypts are overrun, the Stark dead have come back alive and are killing everyone in the crypts. Every single person we know is overrun. They're at their last gasp. They have nothing left. There's still hundreds of thousands of whites coming in and attacking them. And either something has to happen now, or this battle's entirely lost. And it's still not clear what's going to happen, because with this show, we don't know. We don't know if it's a happy ending, right? It's not like you can say, oh, well, this is where something good happens, because that's not what's happened.
We haven't come to expect that at all.
No. And you see a little breeze in the hair of one of the White Walkers behind him.
I've had the really sweet soundtrack, just kind of calm melodic music playing, and that's just like building you up slowly to it. It's not like this big overture action sequence. It's just like a quiet moment.
Yes. And so I was still hoping, like, I wanted Bran to say something. I wanted the Night King to say something. I wanted them to explain, like, something. You wanted to get something out of that. But no, he starts to reach for his sword. And here comes our little heroine out of nowhere, flying through the air, Arya. About to save the day, except then she gets caught by the neck by this superhuman ice demon, and it looks like maybe she's not going to save the day.
But then she does this nifty move. And she's got her wrist held with this knife. She drops it into her right hand, which is lower, at the Night King's waist, and she stabs him in the whatever, if he has organs, I don't know, but she takes him out. Yeah.
And he immediately dissolves into ice dust and is dead, as is every other White Walker.
Every single one.
You see the dragon die. You see every White Walker I'm sorry, I keep on saying White Walker, but White Walkers are clearly the more alive versions versus the zombies, which I think are just the whites. So I apologize for that confusion. Just drop and be dead. Now, I will say there was some confusion for me in this part, because when Sansa and Arya are on the wall and you first see that storm coming, you see Arya hand Sansa a blade and say, "Take this and go down into the crypts." And I assumed that was the Valyrian steel dagger that we had seen so much about. And so I was curious how she had it again. So I went back and rewatched, and it doesn't really show what it was, and I think it must have just been a dragon glass dagger. It didn't show as distinctly as I had imagined the first time that it clearly was that very distinctive Valyrian steel dagger that she had gotten from Bran. So that at first I was like, wait, she doesn't have that. What's she got? But then it was clear that she did. So it was great to see that.
I saw a post out there that was like, they say no one can kill the Night King, and no one killed the Night King because a girl is no one.
So that's awesome.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, that is fantastic.
She really is our MVP this week and perhaps for the series, because she literally was just a tiny little girl at the beginning, and just to watch her taking down all these whites with that big weapon in this episode too, you're like, wow, she is powerful.
Well, considering that she was Arya Underfoot back in the day, the one that, didn't want to be a lady and couldn't stand having to knit with Scepter Mordane or do her sewing, and hated everything about it, hated Joffrey, hated everything about King's Landing when she was forced to go down there as a little girl, eventually gets hooked up with the Hound. She's pretty much tied up with every unsavory character. She's been everywhere. She's seen everybody. She goes across the seas. She comes back. She's trained as an assassin there, and she puts it pretty much all to the test and all on the line, and is our hero of the battle.
Exactly.
Basically saving everyone. Now we assume, right? Like, you see everyone kind of go down, but last we saw, Brienne was about to be killed, right? Jaime was at his last.
They were
breath.
overwhelmed for sure.
Sam was down, like about to get eaten or devoured or whatever happens. So I'm not 100% sure that every one of these survived, but I certainly suspect that if any of these main characters would have been overwhelmed, we would have seen it a little more clearly.
The show has historically given us specific death scenes for our main characters.
Yes.
One question I have, though, is and this is just my ignorance, but did we know that killing just simply stabbing the Night King would disintegrate the entire army?
Well, it's been hinted throughout that if you kill the White Walker who created the various whites, then they would die.
Okay.
So he
created them all.
And he created them all. Yes.
Okay. So it's logical. It makes sense.
So
if
you would have taken down one of the other White Walkers, you may have taken out some of the army. But seeing as how he is the source of all of them, I think that's insinuated that, or implied that, if you take him out, it kills them all.
Got it. I think it was as spectacular a epic battle as we've ever seen, perhaps in film and television. It was a longer battle than Helm's Deep and the Two Towers. So
you think of some
what
of these.
Do you compare it to?
Yeah. We've mentioned Lord of the Rings battles before, because there have been some of the most epic ones. You've got some things from Braveheart, maybe. We talked about Saving Private Ryan. These are motion pictures that are pretty epic proportions, right? This is a show that airs every week, and I think the scale that they were able to bring to and granted, like you said, it took them over a year to put this together.
But they couldn't have done it in just that shorter amount of time, I don't think.
I mean, so basically they made, because the next 3 episodes, this one was an hour and 20 minutes basically, and I think the next 3 are about the same.
About the same.
So those are almost movie length features each. So yeah, it was incredible. It was certainly on the edge of the seat.
I was freaking out.
We talked about it. It was hard to watch. It was difficult. the darkness, some people didn't like it. I didn't have as much of a problem with it. I think it made it hard. I think it was effective. I think it was intentional.
I think it was intentional, and for me, I was just lost in the confusion of it, and in a good way, where you're like, what is even going on? What's going to happen? And you really are uncertain, like, how this is all going to shake out.
Yes,
but
because it basically is showing that we have no control, and no one there has any control. They're all at the mercy of the darkness that's coming.
The only one who does have a sense of where things are going is Melisandre, and that is the end of this episode is just watching her walk off into the wasteland, and
she drops her necklace, which is obviously the source of her power.
Right, and then her robe starts to kind of come down as you kind of vaguely see her turn to her white, gray, very old state, and she drops dead.
Which was another, kind of an epic ending for her. I mean, she went out on her own terms, which was cool. So my question is, not my question, the question is, what now? We've got 3 episodes left. So my first thought was, is that it? Like, it was almost too ezy. I'm not going to say it was easy, because this was obviously an epic battle.
To kind of summarize the death toll really quick, we what did we have? Like 10,000 Dothraki, 8,000-ish unsullied, and several heroes, and yes, hundreds of others, and it was a massive death toll.
Yes. But one little thrust of a dagger and it all ended, we think. So here's my question. One, did killing the Night King really end it all? Is this now the end of the coming winter and all of the undead? Or is there something else? I kind of think that this did it all.
I think so too.
Because I don't really know, if not, what else are you going to do, right? We killed the person that was leading the way, so I don't really know.
Totally possible there's something that we're missing, and maybe there's an undead army waiting somewhere, but...
Yes.
But, yeah, I think that it's really going to steer back to our humans.
Which is what 90%, 95% of the show has been about over
very
the last
little magic
years.
In the show overall. It's very much about the people. And... they can die like normal people most of the time.
Yes. So now we have, what we didn't see at all in this is the Jon and Daenerys struggle going on, right? There was absolutely no mention of Jon's parentage or his claim to the throne. Obviously there was no time. But now that they've beaten this army, and now that they've won this battle, you take a deep breath, and you have to decide, well, what's going to happen next? So... Jon and Daenerys, what's going to happen with them? Clearly there's going to be some conflict between them as they try and flesh out what's going to happen from now on. And it'll be very interesting, as you would assume, that we'll hear, or you'll see, Jon's lineage be brought up to everybody, and then it'll be very interesting to see everyone else's reaction. What's Sansa going to think when she finds out, and Arya, and Tyrion? All these main characters who don't know.
What about Jaime being up there? And his allegiance is obviously going to be a huge factor.
Because obviously everyone set everything aside for this battle, but now it's going to have to come back to whose side is everyone on.
And I think another question is, how much was the Northern Army depleted during this battle? Is that going to be a big issue for them to decide, okay, do we have enough people to actually go down there and fight? We've got a couple of dragons, but are they even in fighting shape? And
because we see them both get pretty banged up.
And right? The Dothraki have been exterminated, basically, so we don't know how much of a fighting force they even have anymore.
Which was really sad, right?
Really.
They've been with Dany all along.
Since the very beginning.
And all of a sudden her Dothraki are entirely exterminated, from what we understand. There could be a few that come limping back, but I certainly don't expect that. We assume Grey Worm made it out alive, but we assume that most of the Unsullied did die in the battle as well. We didn't really see anything that insinuated the Knights of the Vale were there, but I think they were there, right? And I assume a lot of them were just the people that were nameless, faceless people getting tossed off the wall and just dying. So, clearly their forces are decimated. And that was Cersei's plan all along, right? Cersei says, let them go take care of it. This is kind of like the perfect scenario for Cersei, who, one, okay, the undead are now dead, and I don't have to worry about them. And two, my main living enemies are decimated to where they have almost no strength left.
And this is a real world military strategy where you let an army, as opposed to going up to a cold region to fight an army, you let them starve to death up there. And so it's taken from the real world. I guess another question is, I think that there were potentially some strategic military failures during this battle, and I wonder if some of our characters are going to start fighting about, Daenerys shouldn't have flown in there, or what were you thinking doing this or that, and so maybe some of that will start some of these fissures between them. But
you would hope that since they won the battle, they're able to kind of put those things aside. But with 3 episodes left, there's certainly going to be some conflict that needs to be resolved, and we still have absolutely no idea what the conclusion of this entire season, let alone series of shows, is going to bring about. Whether it's one faction or the other actually claiming the Iron Throne, or we really don't.
I'm no more certain of any of those questions.
No.
They all really remain a mystery. And I'm sure once we get there, we'll be like, oh, yeah, well, there were all these threads, and we should have seen it coming, and we should have picked up on it way earlier.
But this is a show that's so interesting, because you watch a lot of shows, but with this one, pretty much everything that's said, you look at it a little differently. Like, is that a hint towards something else coming? Like, people are going back to, like, simple lines that were spoken during the first episode in the first season, and is that a hint towards something? Like, somebody said this, does that mean that at the very end? And clearly they can't all be pointing towards something, but I definitely predict that there are going to, once it's done, you'll be able to look back and say, oh yeah, there were some hints along the way. I'm quite sure of that.
I think they've been very intentional about doing that, and I think at least for the past few seasons, since they've veered away from the book storyline, that they've had to have been very intentional about where this was all going. So
coming into this episode, we kind of knew what to expect, right? We knew that there was this epic battle coming. Now I feel like we're back in muddy waters again. We're not really quite sure. There were some hints in the what's going to happen next week. They showed Cersei again, so it's clearly implied that we're going to be heading back to King's Landing, but I don't know at what pace that's going to happen. It might not be right away, or if they're just going to jump up and go, and it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out over the next basically 360 minutes.
Shows that sometimes they'll take an episode to say, this is just going to be a massive battle, and we're just going to take our time with it and keep you there, and then bring you back to the other storylines later on. And most of the episodes do switch pretty readily between different stories and fling you across the seas to these different plots, but when they do take their time and keep you focused on one, it's really fun to do that. So I think we'll probably start switching back and forth again.
So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, basically 5 or 6 characters that we really knew who died. Was that enough? Do you think we lost enough people to make it real? Because clearly, and I'm not saying that to be insensitive, but clearly we had to lose people here, or else it wouldn't have been real, right? And if none of the main characters had died, it would have felt hollow and empty. But they did. A couple of them did. But none, I think, if you're going to say main characters, I think Jorah Mormont and Theon are the two
who've been with us since the very beginning.
Who've been with us all along. The rest, they're side characters that have kind of come and gone and had minor roles here and there. Was it enough to satisfy you? Do you think that it was realistic enough that everyone else made it through?
Well, realistic, probably not, but I kind of feel
like
that there's plenty still to happen, and who knows what that is. The battle with the White Walkers was literally that was pretty much the central premise from the very cold open of this show. So now, where do we go?
And all 3 episodes this season have been great. I have not been left wanting after any of them. And I'm certainly...
I think after the first 2, I was wanting this. And we got this.
And I've only watched it once. I still have to go back and watch it again. Because I'm sure we will see some things. And And now knowing what's going on, I'm sure you'll kind of see it in a different light and kind of have a little bit more understanding of what's happening. But
maybe not a different light unless you buy a new TV. So
yes, maybe now you need to go get the new 4K.
Maybe a different light, but still not very much light at all. So.
No, still very dark. So yes, we can have those jokes will persist, I'm sure, until next week. But yeah, very good. So that's episode 3. We'll be back in a week to look at episode 4 and kind of see where we're going from here. Thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll see you then.